My wife called me needy and turned my trauma into a weapon. I recorded gaslighting, named the abuse, and ended the marriage with cold revenge. It started 3 months ago when I made the mistake of opening up to her about my childhood. We were having one of those late-night conversations that married couples sometimes have, where you think you're building intimacy, but you're actually handing someone ammunition. I told her about growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes, never really having that stable foundation most kids take for granted. She seemed sympathetic at the time, held my hand, said all the right things about how strong I was for overcoming that. I actually thought it brought us closer together. Shows you how naive I could be back then. The first red flag came 2 weeks later during a completely unrelated argument about household chores. I had asked her to help with the dishes since I had been working late every night that week. Instead of just saying yes or no like a normal person, she looked at me with this cold smile and said, "Oh, you need me to take care of you? Is this because you never had a mother figure to do it?" I was so shocked by the comment that I just stared at her. She had taken something deeply personal and weaponized it over dirty dishes, but instead of addressing it head-on, I made my second mistake. I let it slide, told myself she was just stressed, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. That silence was my green light to her. She had found my weakness, and she was going to exploit it. The attacks became more frequent and more calculated. When I would ask her to spend time together on weekends, she would say things like, "Not everyone needs constant validation to feel secure." When I mentioned feeling disconnected from her emotionally, she would respond with, "Maybe you should work on your abandonment issues instead of making them my problem." Each comment was surgically precise, designed to hit exactly where it would hurt most. She had studied my vulnerabilities like a strategist planning a war. And for weeks, I kept taking it because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought I was being understanding, being patient, but patience has its limits, and understanding doesn't mean being someone's emotional punching bag. The worst part wasn't even the comments themselves. It was how she delivered them with this smug satisfaction, like she was teaching me some kind of lesson, like my childhood trauma was something I deserved to be punished for, like my openness with her had been a mistake that needed correcting. I started noticing a pattern. Every time she felt criticized or called out on anything, she would immediately reach for the childhood card. Forgot to pick up groceries? Maybe if you had learned responsibility as a kid, asked her to be more considerate about plans? This is your need for control talking. She had turned my most vulnerable moment into her most powerful weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision every single time she wanted to end an argument or make me back down. But what she didn't realize was that I was taking notes. Mental notes on every attack, every calculated cruelty, every moment she chose to use my past against me instead of addressing the actual issue at hand. I was building a case, collecting evidence of exactly who I was married to. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening when I got home from work exhausted. I'd been pulling 12-hour days on a project that was falling apart due to circumstances beyond my control. All I wanted was to come home to some peace, maybe have dinner with my wife and decompress from the day. Instead, I walked into a house that looked like a tornado had hit it. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry scattered across the living room, takeout containers from 3 different meals just sitting on the counter. I wasn't angry about the mess itself. I was tired, but I understood that sometimes life gets chaotic. What bothered me was that she was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't contributed to any of it. So I did what any reasonable husband would do. I asked if we could tackle it together. Her response to my simple request for help cleaning up was immediate and brutal. She didn't even look up from her phone when she said, "There you go again, needing someone to take care of things for you. Some people can handle their own responsibilities without requiring a support system." The words hit exactly where she intended them to. But this time, instead of backing down, I stood there analyzing what had just happened. She had taken a reasonable request from a tired husband and turned it into a character assassination based on my childhood. That's when I realized this wasn't accidental anymore. This was deliberate psychological warfare. Over the next few weeks, she escalated her tactics beyond our private conversations. She started making comments in front of other people, always with that same calculated cruelty disguised as concern or observation. At dinner with her parents, when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed at work, she chimed in with, "He has a hard time with stress. I think it comes from not having stable role models growing up." Her mother gave me this pitying look that made my skin crawl. Her father just nodded like she had made some profound psychological insight. The following weekend at a barbecue with friends, I was telling a story about a coworker who had been particularly difficult to deal with. Before I could finish, she interrupted with, "You always take things so personally. It's probably because you never learned healthy relationship boundaries as a child." Everyone got quiet and uncomfortable. I could see them processing this information, filing it away, looking at me differently. She was systematically destroying my reputation and my relationships by broadcasting my most private struggles as explanations for every normal human emotion I expressed. Tired, childhood trauma, frustrated, abandonment issues, wanting to spend time with my wife, neediness from not being loved enough as a kid. The most insidious part was how she presented it, never with obvious malice, always with this fake concern that made it impossible to call out directly without looking defensive or unstable. She had perfected the art of public humiliation, disguised as psychological analysis. But she made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed I would keep accepting it because I had been accepting it. She thought my silence meant submission, that my patience meant weakness. She confused my love for her with fear of confrontation. The truth was, I had been documenting every single attack, every public humiliation, every moment she chose cruelty over compassion. I was building a complete picture of who she really was beneath the concerned wife facade, and I was getting ready to show her exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for stupidity. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration. I had finally completed that nightmare project at work, the one that had been consuming my life for months. It was a major success, potentially career-changing, and I was genuinely excited to share the news with her. I came home with takeout from her favorite restaurant, a bottle of wine, ready to celebrate this victory together. I found her in the kitchen on a video call with her sister, and I waited patiently for her to finish so I could share my good news. When she hung up, I told her about the project, about the recognition I was getting from management, about how this could open doors for both of us. Her response was to stare at me for a moment, then say, "It's interesting how much external validation means to you. Most people don't need that level of approval to feel good about themselves." I stood there holding takeout containers and a bottle of wine, having just shared one of the biggest professional achievements of my life, and she had turned it into another attack on my childhood trauma. She had taken my moment of genuine joy and poisoned it with her psychological warfare. That's when I realized something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. She wasn't my partner anymore. She wasn't even my adversary. She was a predator who had identified my weakness and was feeding on it systematically. But predators make mistakes when they get overconfident. They start believing their own superiority, start thinking their prey will never fight back. They forget that cornered animals are the most dangerous ones. She was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The final confrontation happened 3 days after she had poisoned my work celebration. I had been operating on a completely different level since that moment, watching her with the clarity of someone who finally understood the game being played. She must have sensed the shift because her attacks became more frequent and more vicious. It was like she could feel her control slipping and was desperately trying to reassert dominance through escalation. The opportunity she chose for her ultimate mistake was perfect in its irony. We were having a discussion about our future, about some changes I wanted to make in how we handled our finances and household responsibilities. Nothing dramatic, just normal married couple planning. But instead of engaging with the actual topics, she went straight for her favorite weapon. She looked at me with that familiar cold smile and said, "You know what your real problem is? You're just needy. Are you needy because nobody loved you as a child? Is that why you always need everything to be about you?" The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. She had finally said it explicitly. No more hiding behind fake concern or psychological analysis. She had weaponized my childhood trauma in its purest, most cruel form. For a moment, I just looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had promised to love and support me had turned my deepest vulnerability into her favorite tool of control. She was sitting there with that smug expression, waiting for me to crumble like I always did. Instead, I started laughing. Not bitter laughter, not angry laughter, genuine, amused laughter that clearly caught her completely off guard. Her confident expression started to falter as I continued chuckling and shaking my head. "Needy," I said, still smiling. "Needy for what exactly? Your drama, your constant psychological attacks, your need to turn every conversation into an opportunity to tear me down?" I paused, letting the question sink in, because if that's what needy means, then absolutely not. I'm not needy for any of that. Her mouth opened to respond, but I wasn't finished. "You want to talk about childhood trauma? Let's talk about what kind. of person takes someone else's deepest pain and turns it into their personal entertainment. Let's discuss what kind of woman hears her husband's story about growing up without love and thinks, "Great, now I have ammunition." I could see her starting to realize this wasn't going the way she had planned. The smugness was disappearing, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "You think I'm needy because I wanted a partner instead of a predator? Because I expected basic human decency from my wife? Because I thought marriage meant supporting each other instead of keeping an arsenal of psychological weapons?" I stood up and walked closer to where she was sitting. Not intimidating, just confident, in control. "Here's what's actually happening here. You found out I had some childhood wounds, and instead of helping them heal, you decided to keep them open and pick at them whenever you felt like asserting power. That doesn't make me needy. That makes you cruel." She tried to interrupt, probably with some deflection about how I was being too sensitive, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You asked if I'm needy because nobody loved me as a child. Here's my answer. No, I'm not needy at all. I'm selective, and I'm done selecting someone who thinks love means psychological warfare." The color had completely drained from her face. She was finally understanding that her favorite weapon had just backfired spectacularly. "You want to know what needy looks like? Needy is someone who can't win an argument without attacking their partner's childhood trauma. Needy is someone who can't feel powerful unless they're making someone else feel powerless. Needy is someone who built their entire sense of superiority on their husband's vulnerability." I sat back down completely calm, completely in control. "So no, I'm not needy for your love. I'm not needy for your approval. And I'm definitely not needy for your psychological games. What I am is done. Done pretending this is normal. Done accepting cruelty as communication. Done being your emotional punching bag." She was staring at me like she was seeing a completely different person, which in a way she was. The man who used to absorb her attacks and apologize for existing was gone. In his place was someone who had finally recognized her tactics for what they were, and refused to play along anymore. "From now on, we're going to have a very different kind of relationship. One where you treat me with basic human respect, or you don't have a relationship with me at all. Your choice." The silence that followed was absolute. She had spent months conditioning me to crumble at her attacks, and instead I had completely dismantled her entire strategy in under 5 minutes. Her psychological warfare had just met its match, and she was clearly unprepared for what came next. The aftermath of my response was immediate and revealing. She sat there in stunned silence for about 30 seconds, processing the fact that her most reliable weapon had not only failed, but had been turned against her completely. Then came the predictable cycle of manipulation tactics that people like her always use when their primary strategy fails. First was the fake confusion approach. "I don't understand why you're being so hostile. I was just trying to help you understand yourself better. I care about you. That's why I point these things out." I looked at her with the same calm expression I had maintained throughout my response, helping me understand myself by publicly humiliating me in front of your family, by turning every conversation into an attack on my childhood. That's an interesting definition of care. When the fake confusion didn't work, she moved to gaslighting. "You're completely overreacting. I never said those things the way you're describing them. You're being way too sensitive about normal conversations." "Normal conversations," I repeated slowly. "So, when you told your parents that my work stress comes from not having stable role models, that was normal. When you announced to our friends that I take things personally because of childhood boundary issues, that was just casual conversation." I could see her scrambling mentally, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that had slipped completely away from her. Next came the victim reversal. "I can't believe you're attacking me like this. All I've ever done is try to support you through your issues. This is how you repay me for being understanding about your past." This was the moment I knew I had her completely figured out. She was following the manipulation playbook so precisely it was almost textbook. "Supporting me," I said, nodding thoughtfully. "Is that what we're calling it when you use someone's trauma as a weapon?" Because I have a different word for that. Several different words, actually, none of them particularly flattering. Her eyes flashed with anger then, the mask slipping for just a moment. "You know what? Maybe I was right about you being needy. Look how you're acting over a few comments. This is exactly the kind of behavior that proves my point," and there it was. When all else failed, she went right back to the same weapon that had just exploded in her face. She literally could not help herself. I actually smiled at that. "Perfect. Thank you for proving everything I just said about you. When your manipulation tactics don't work, you immediately go back to attacking my childhood. It's like watching someone reload a gun that just backfired and blew up in their hands. She was getting visibly frustrated now, realizing that none of her usual tricks were having any effect. I was analyzing her moves instead of absorbing them, responding with logic instead of emotion. "You think you're so smart," she said, her voice getting sharper. "But you're still the same damaged person you always were. I was just honest enough to point it out." "Honest," I repeated. "There's that word again. You keep using it, but I don't think it means what you think it means. Honest would be saying, I'm angry about something and I want to hurt you, so I'm going to attack your childhood trauma. What you do is disguise cruelty as psychology and call it honesty." I leaned forward slightly. "But since we're being honest now, let me share some observations about you. You're someone who can't handle being wrong, so you attack instead of acknowledging mistakes. You're someone who feels powerless unless you're making someone else feel powerless. And you're someone who took your husband's trust and vulnerability and turned it into ammunition." She was getting angrier by the second, which was exactly what I wanted. Angry people reveal their true nature. "At least I'm not pathetic enough to still be affected by things that happened decades ago," she snapped. "Most people move on from their childhoods instead of using them as excuses for everything." I sat back completely relaxed. "And there's the real you. No more fake concern. No more psychological analysis disguised as help. Just pure cruelty. Thank you for finally being honest about who you really are." The look on her face was priceless. She had just revealed exactly what I had been saying about her in real time with her own words. "You want to know the difference between us?" I continued. "My childhood experiences taught me what real love and support look like because I learned what they don't look like. Your behavior taught me what manipulation and emotional abuse look like. The difference is I learned from my experiences to become a better person. You learned from yours to become a predator." She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished establishing the new dynamic. "From this moment forward, every conversation we have will be recorded or witnessed. Every interaction will be documented, not because I'm paranoid, but because you've proven that you can't be trusted to have honest discussions without resorting to psychological warfare." Her face went pale at that. The idea of losing her ability to gaslight and manipulate in private clearly terrified her. "And if you ever, and I mean ever, try to use my childhood against me again, this marriage will be over that same day. Not after counseling, not after discussion, not after giving you another chance. Over immediately, final." I stood up and looked down at her. "The person you've been attacking and manipulating for months is gone. In his place is someone who knows exactly who you are and exactly what you're capable of. The question now is whether you're capable of being someone worth staying married to." The power dynamic had completely reversed, and we both knew it. The days following our confrontation were fascinating to watch. She went through every stage of loss you could imagine. Except what she was losing wasn't a person. It was her power over me. First came the testing phase. She clearly thought my ultimatum was just another emotional outburst that would fade with time. So, she tried subtle versions of her old tactics to see if I was serious. During breakfast 2 days later, she made a comment about how I was overthinking a work situation. The old me would have absorbed that as valid criticism. The new me looked at her directly and said, "Are you attempting to psychoanalyze me right now?" The way she immediately backtracked was almost comical. No, I was just making conversation good because we discussed what happens if you go back to that behavior." She got very quiet after that. Next came the love bombing phase. Suddenly, she was the most attentive wife in the world, making my favorite meals, suggesting activities we used to enjoy together, being physically affectionate, in ways she hadn't been in months. But here's what she didn't understand. You can't rebuild trust through gestures when the foundation has been revealed to be completely rotten. Every kind act felt calculated because I now knew what she was capable of. When kindness didn't serve her purposes, when the love bombing didn't work, she moved to recruitment tactics. She started having conversations with her friends and family about our rough patch, carefully framing herself as the victim of my sudden unreasonable behavior. I know this because her sister called me directly. "She says you've been really harsh with her lately," her sister said. "She's worried about you, thinks maybe you're having some kind of breakdown." I had been expecting this. Did she mention the part where she's been using my childhood trauma as a weapon for months? Or did she skip that detail in her victim narrative? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She had painted herself as the concerned wife dealing with an unstable husband, completely omitting her role in creating the instability. "I think there might be some miscommunication here. her sister said carefully. There's no miscommunication. There's documentation. Would you like me to send you examples of her using my personal vulnerabilities against me in public settings? Because I have them. That conversation ended very quickly. But the most revealing phase was when she realized none of her usual tactics were working and she escalated to threats. You know what? She said during dinner one evening. Maybe we should just separate if you're going to be this difficult. Maybe you need space to work on your issues without taking them out on me. I set down my fork and looked at her calmly. Are you threatening me with divorce? I'm not threatening anything. I'm just saying that if you can't handle being in a normal relationship without creating all this drama, maybe you're not ready for marriage. This was her nuclear option. She was betting that the fear of abandonment she had spent months exploiting would make me backtrack and apologize for standing up to her. Instead, I reached for my phone and opened the voice recorder app, setting it between us on the table. Please repeat what you just said about divorce. For the record, her face went white. Why are you recording this? Because you just threatened to leave me for refusing to accept psychological abuse. I want to make sure I have your exact words in case this becomes relevant later. She stared at the phone like it was a weapon pointed at her, which, in a way it was. The weapon of accountability. Turn that off. You're being ridiculous. I'm being thorough. You said maybe we should separate because I won't let you attack my childhood anymore. You said maybe I'm not ready for marriage because I established boundaries. Do you stand by those statements? She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Here's what's actually happening, I continued, the phone still recording. You're threatening divorce because your favorite manipulation tactic stopped working. You're trying to use my fear of abandonment to force me back into accepting abuse, and you're doing it while framing yourself as the victim of my difficult behavior. I picked up the phone and stopped the recording. This goes in the documentation file along with everything else. Keep making threats if you want. Keep trying to manipulate me if you want, but understand that every attempt is being recorded and will be used to establish a pattern if we end up in divorce court. The look of panic on her face was unmistakable. She had just realized that her threats had no power over me anymore. Worse, she had realized that I was 3 steps ahead of her in terms of preparation and documentation. But what really terrified her was the calm way I was handling everything. She needed me to be emotional, reactive, desperate. Instead, I was methodical, prepared, and completely unafraid of her worst-case scenarios. You've changed, she said quietly. And for the first time in months, there was no manipulation in her voice. Just recognition. You're absolutely right, I replied. I changed the moment I realized that the person I married was systematically destroying my self-worth for sport. The question is whether you're capable of changing too, or if this is just who you are. She didn't have an answer for that, but her behavior over the next few days would tell me everything I needed to know about whether this marriage was salvageable, or if I needed to start making more permanent plans. The final test came exactly 1 week after I had established my new boundaries. She had been walking on eggshells, clearly trying to figure out if my transformation was permanent, or just a phase she needed to wait out. The situation that revealed everything happened during what should have been a routine conversation about weekend plans. I mentioned wanting to visit my friend who lived about 2 hours away, someone I hadn't seen in months because she had always found reasons why those trips were inconvenient. 2 hours seems like a long drive just to hang out, she said, and I could hear the calculation in her voice. She was testing the waters, seeing if she could subtly control the situation without triggering my new boundaries. It's worth it to see a good friend, I replied simply. That's when she made her fatal mistake. She thought she was being clever, thought she had found a way around my ultimatum by being indirect. I just think it's interesting how much you need these external relationships to feel validated. Most secure people don't require that level of social approval. The words hit the air like a slap. She had just violated my boundary in the most calculated way possible, using the exact same psychological manipulation tactics while trying to avoid explicitly mentioning my childhood. I looked at her for a long moment, and I could see the exact second she realized what she had done. The confident expression melted off her face as she watched me stand up and walk to the bedroom. "Where are you going?" she called after me. I didn't answer. I was too busy pulling out the suitcase I had prepared for exactly this scenario. When I came back to the living room with my packed bag, she was sitting exactly where I had left her, but now she looked terrified. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said calmly. "You just broke the one boundary I explicitly told you would end this marriage immediately." "I didn't mention your childhood," she said quickly. "I didn't break any boundary." I almost laughed at that. You think you found a loophole by attacking my need for external validation instead of explicitly mentioning abandonment? You think I don't recognize the same psychological warfare just because you changed a few words? Her mouth opened and closed without sound. She knew she was caught. You couldn't help yourself, I continued, setting my bag by the door. You had 7 days to prove you could treat me with basic human respect, and you chose to go right back to your favorite game. You just couldn't resist taking one more shot at my psychological vulnerabilities. Please don't leave, she said. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I heard genuine panic in her voice. I'll change. I promise I'll change. You had months to change. You had weeks of clear warnings to change. You had 7 days after an explicit ultimatum to change. Instead, you spent that time looking for ways around my boundaries rather than respecting them. I picked up my bag and headed toward the door. This isn't fair, she said, following me. You can't just leave over one comment. Marriage is supposed to be about working through problems together. I turned back to face her one final time. You're absolutely right. Marriage is supposed to be about working through problems together. But you turned our marriage into one person working through problems, while the other person creates new ones for entertainment. I'll go to counseling, she said desperately. We can fix this. Counseling works when both people want to change. You don't want to change. You want to find better ways to get away with the same behavior. There's a difference. I opened the door and stepped halfway through it before delivering my final words to her. You asked me if I was needy because nobody loved me as a child. Here's your answer. I learned what love actually looks like by experiencing what it doesn't look like. Real love doesn't use your vulnerabilities against you. Real love doesn't turn your trust into ammunition. Real love doesn't require you to accept psychological warfare as communication. I paused, looking at her one last time. The irony is I'm not the needy one in this relationship. You are. You needed to feel superior so badly that you destroyed the one person who actually loved you. You needed control so desperately that you turned intimacy into manipulation. You needed power so much that you sacrificed partnership. Her face was streaming with tears now, but they felt like a performance rather than genuine remorse. I hope someday you figure out the difference between love and control, but you're going to have to figure it out without me as your test subject. I walked out and closed the door behind me. 3 months later, the divorce papers were finalized. She tried multiple times to reconcile, each attempt following the same pattern of temporary change followed by gradual regression to her old tactics. The most telling moment came during mediation, when she told the counselor that I was too sensitive about my past, and that she had been trying to help me grow emotionally. Even in divorce proceedings, she couldn't stop using my childhood against me. But here's what she never understood. She didn't destroy me by weaponizing my trauma. She freed me. She showed me exactly what I would never accept again from anyone. She taught me that my past didn't make me weak. Her response to it made her cruel. Today, I'm in a relationship with someone who knows my entire story and has never once used it against me. Someone who sees my vulnerability as trust, not as opportunity. Someone who understands that real strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about choosing what you'll accept after you've been hurt. My ex-wife was right about one thing. I am selective about love now. I select people who understand that love is supposed to heal wounds, not keep them open for easy access. I select people who see partnership as building each other up, not tearing each other down for sport. And yes, I learned that from not being loved properly as a child. The difference is, I used that lesson to become someone worth loving. She used it to become someone worth leaving.